Hello, my wonderful family. I hope you're all having a wonderful time. You all feel like family to me, and I always strive to give you the best experience. I've placed only one ad during the story at the 10-minute mark. The rest are after the story ends. This way, you can enjoy it without interruptions. So please watch till the end. Like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Your love and support mean everything to me. Hidden deep in the misty hills, it was a place of ruins and forgotten whispers. The villagers avoided speaking of its past, but the legend remained, a tale of greed, curses, and a god who devoured those who sought his riches. Victor Grayson was just a boy when he first heard the story. His mother, Emily, had warned him never to step inside the old mansion at the edge of the town. The decaying structure, covered in vines and shadowed by twisted trees, was the home of an ancient secret, a treasure hidden within the mansion's depths, guarded by the monstrous entity known as Malagar. "Forget about it, Victor," his mother had whispered, her voice trembling. "That place swallows men whole." But a child's curiosity was a dangerous thing. One stormy evening, Victor and his younger brother ventured near the mansion. The iron gates stood rusted but firm, and beyond them, the silhouette of the house loomed like a sleeping beast. As the wind howled, Victor felt a strange pull toward the house, a whisper that seemed to crawl into his mind. His brother hesitated. "Let's go back." But Victor, blinded by curiosity, only took another step forward. That was the first time he saw him. A shadow, barely human, stood at one of the broken windows. Its head twisted at an unnatural angle, and hollow eyes watched him with eerie stillness. Then, in a blink, it was gone. Terror gripped Victor. He ran home, never speaking of what he had seen. But the whisper of Malagar had already taken root, inside him. Years passed, and Black Hollow changed. The mansion remained untouched, but Victor was no longer a child. He was a man now, struggling to survive in a world that offered him nothing but hardship. His mother had died, leaving behind debts and an empty house. The whispers returned, more tempting than ever. Treasure lies beneath the mansion. Gold beyond your wildest dreams. Victor tried to resist, but desperation clouded his judgment. He returned to the mansion one fateful night, armed with a lantern and an iron crowbar. The doors groaned as he forced them open, revealing a world swallowed by dust and time. Inside, the air was thick with decay. The grand staircase loomed before him, its banisters carved with symbols that sent a shiver through his spine. He made his way to the cellar, the place the legend spoke of. The walls of the underground chamber were lined with grotesque carvings, depicting Malagar, the god of greed, reaching out with clawed hands. A stone altar stood in the center, and beneath it, Victor found the first gold coin. A single coin, yet it felt heavy with something more than metal. His heart pounded as he slipped it into his pocket. And then, the shadows moved. A whisper crawled into his ears, ancient and hungry. "You have taken what is mine." Victor fled that night, but he did not return empty-handed. Victor's life changed. The single gold coin, when sold, was enough to pay his debts. But it wasn't enough. The whisper in his mind grew louder, urging him to return. So he did. Night after night, Victor ventured into the mansion, stealing more gold. Each time he felt watched, but the wealth clouded his fear. He ignored the warnings, ignored the shadows that crept closer each time he left. By the time he had built a fortune, he was no longer the same man. His eyes bore the madness of greed. His hands never stopped trembling. His son, Ryan, noticed the change. "Father, where do you go every night?" Victor never answered, until the day he saw his reflection in the mirror. and realized it was not his own face staring back. The mansion was no longer just a place of riches. It was something alive. The walls whispered. The darkness pulsed with something unnatural. One night, as Victor reached for another gold coin, he heard footsteps, not his own. Turning slowly, he saw it. A twisted, emaciated creature, its face barely human. It was Malagar, crawling toward him on all fours, its hollow eyes burning with hunger. "You have taken too much," it rasped. Victor stumbled back, realizing the truth too late. The wealth he had taken came at a cost. A debt had to be paid, and now Malagar had come to collect. Victor never returned home that night. Ryan, now a young man, searched for his father. He knew where Victor went every night, so he stepped into the mansion. The air inside felt wrong, thick with something beyond human understanding. Deeper into the house he went, until he reached the cellar. The gold lay scattered across the floor, but Victor was nowhere to be seen. Only the whisper remained. "A son for a father. Take the gold, Ryan." Ryan stared at the cursed treasure, knowing the truth. His father had traded his soul for greed. Would he do the same? Ryan could have taken the gold. He could have carried his father's curse forward. But instead, he turned away, leaving the mansion forever. As he stepped outside, the doors slammed shut behind him. And inside, in the endless darkness, Victor's screams never stopped. The curse of Malagar had claimed another victim, and it would wait for the next greedy soul to come searching. The old monastery stood atop the cliffs of Dunwich, overlooking the endless expanse of the North Sea. A cursed place, locals said, abandoned for centuries after the monks who once lived there mysteriously vanished. But for Samuel Carter, a historian at the University of London, the monastery was more than ruins. It was a mystery waiting to be solved. Samuel had spent years searching for clues about Malagar, the forgotten god of hunger and greed. Every ancient manuscript he found hinted at one terrifying truth. The monks had not abandoned the monastery. They had been consumed. Yet, despite the warnings, Samuel was determined to find the truth. And if the legends were real, perhaps even uncover the lost treasure of Malagar. With his journal in hand, he set off toward the ruins, unaware of the watchful eyes lurking in the mist. The monastery's entrance was sealed by time, the doors warped and broken. Inside, a thick layer of dust coated everything: the wooden pews, the altar, the statues of saints with faces worn away by age. As Samuel explored, he found something strange, a mural hidden behind layers of grime. He wiped it clean, revealing a horrific sight: a god with no eyes, no mouth, only a gaping hole where a face should be. The inscription beneath it read, "He who takes from the god shall be taken by the god." Samuel's heart pounded. He had seen this name before. Malagar. He pressed further into the monastery, eventually finding a spiral staircase descending into the darkness. The walls were carved with ancient symbols, prayers, warnings, pleas for mercy. At the bottom, he found what he had been looking for. A golden chalice sat atop a stone altar, ancient and untouched. The treasure of Malagar. Samuel's fingers trembled as he reached for it, and then the whispering began. The moment his fingers brushed the chalice, the air in the room shifted. The whispering grew louder, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You have taken from me." Samuel turned sharply, his lantern flickering. Shadows moved at the edges of the chamber. The walls seemed to breathe. Then the darkness took shape. A figure stepped forward, tall and skeletal, its face an abyss. Malagar. Samuel's breath caught. The god of greed, the devourer of souls, was real. A deal, the voice rasped, ancient and hollow. A trade, your freedom, or another in your place. Samuel should have run. He should have thrown the chalice away, but instead, he whispered, "Tell me more." Samuel's mind raced. Could he truly escape this place without consequences? Malagar's answer was simple: bring another soul to replace his own. The next day, Samuel returned to town. His mind screamed at him to flee, to forget what he had seen. But the golden chalice burned in his thoughts. That night, in a dimly lit pub, Samuel found an easy target. Michael Hargrove, a reckless treasure hunter looking for a quick fortune. "You believe in legends?" Samuel asked, his voice carefully neutral. Michael smirked. "If there's gold involved, I believe anything." Samuel hesitated. For a brief moment he thought of warning Michael, but the whispers in his mind urged him forward. Malagar was waiting. Samuel led Michael back to the monastery, his hands trembling as they descended the staircase. "Where's this treasure you promised?" Michael asked, growing impatient. Samuel forced a smile. "Just ahead." They reached the altar. The chalice gleamed in the flickering lantern light. Michael took a step forward, and the room came alive. Shadows crawled from the walls. The whispering turned to screams. Michael spun around, panic in his eyes. "What the hell is this?" And then Malagar emerged. His skeletal form loomed over them. Michael screamed, but it was too late. Dark tendrils wrapped around him, pulling him into the abyss. His screams echoed long after his body was gone. Samuel fell to his knees, his body trembling. And then the whisper returned. "One is not enough." Days passed, then weeks. Samuel tried to forget. But Malagar did not forget. The whispers haunted him, following him in his sleep. More. At first, Samuel resisted. He tried to drown the voice in alcohol, in sleepless nights, in distractions. But the more he denied Malagar, the worse it became. He began seeing things, twisted faces and reflections, shadows moving when no one was there. And then, one night, as he lay in bed, his own reflection turned to face him, and whispered, "You are mine." The next morning, he chose his next victim. Samuel became a hunter. Over the months, dozens of men disappeared after following him to the monastery. The town whispered of something dark, but no one suspected the quiet historian. Samuel was careful, too careful. But gods are not bound by time. One cold winter's night, he returned to the monastery with his latest offering. But as he entered the cellar, he found the altar empty, and Malagar was waiting. The god spoke only one word: "Enough." And then, the shadows turned on Samuel. Samuel screamed as the darkness swallowed him whole. For all his cunning, all his cruelty, he had never been in control. Malagar did not grant freedom. He granted borrowed time. And now, Samuel was the next sacrifice. His bones turned to dust, his soul trapped in endless torment. And the monastery remained, waiting for the next foolish soul to seek the riches of a god. Years later, a young man named Daniel Holloway arrived in Dunwich, looking for a lost historian named Samuel Carter. The townspeople only shook their heads. "No one by that name," they said. "But if you're looking for treasure, there's an old monastery up the cliffs." Daniel's eyes lit up with excitement, and in the shadows of the ruins, something waited. The letter arrived on a cold autumn morning. sealed with an old-fashioned wax stamp. Jonathan Graves turned it over in his hands, confused. He had never heard of Edward Blackwood, yet the letter claimed he was the last living heir of the Blackwood family estate. It seemed impossible. He had no known relatives, no family history worth speaking of. Yet, inside the envelope was a deed, a vast mansion in the countryside, untouched for over a century. His mind whispered one word: fortune. But as he read further, his stomach turned. If you accept this inheritance, know that it carries a terrible burden. Jonathan shook his head and laughed. Superstition. Nonsense. But something deep inside him stirred with unease, and in the shadows of the empty apartment, something else watched. Him read. The journey to Blackwood Manor was long and silent. Jonathan watched the rolling hills turn to thick, gnarled forests, the roads narrowing into twisted, fog-lined paths. By the time he arrived, the sun had already begun to set. The manor stood like a beast in the darkness, tall, imposing, its windows hollow as empty eyes. The caretaker, an old man named Harold Finch, met him at the gates. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "You should not have come," he murmured. Jonathan smirked. "It's just a house." Harold did not smile back. "It's never just a house." The first night in the manor was uneventful. At first, Jonathan explored its vast halls, running his fingers over dusty bookshelves and portraits of long-dead relatives. The air smelled of age, of something forgotten. By midnight, the silence became too loud. He woke to a soft scratching at his bedroom door. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then 3 deliberate knocks. Jonathan's breath hitched. Slowly he got up, opened the door. Nothing. But the hallway felt wrong. The shadows seemed deeper, stretching unnaturally along the walls. And far down the corridor, a door creaked, open on its own. Something was waiting for him inside. Jonathan followed the pull of curiosity, stepping into the room at the end of the hall. It was filled with portraits, massive, towering paintings of Blackwood ancestors. But unlike ordinary paintings, their eyes were missing. As Jonathan stepped closer, a whisper filled the room. "You should leave." His breath caught. His reflection in the glass of the paintings twitched, even though he hadn't moved. And then, one by one, the paintings turned to face him. Jonathan stumbled back, his pulse racing. The whisper returned, louder this time. "He is coming." Jonathan spent the next day searching the manor for answers. He found Harold Finch in the greenhouse, pruning dead vines with trembling hands. "What happened here?" Jonathan demanded. Harold hesitated, his knuckles white around the shears. "Edward Blackwood, your ancestor. He made a bargain." "A bargain?" Jonathan scoffed. "With who?" Harold's voice dropped to a whisper. "Not who. What?" Jonathan's stomach twisted. He had read about family curses, about those who traded, something in exchange for power, wealth, or life. And something told him Edward Blackwood's deal was still unfinished. That night Jonathan heard it again, the knocking. Only this time, it didn't stop. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until the very walls of the house seemed to shake, and then the door burst open. A figure stood in the darkness, tall, its face obscured by shadow. But its presence was suffocating, wrong, a thing that did not belong in this world. "You wear my blood." Jonathan staggered back. "What do you want?" It took a step forward. The candles flickered out. Your place was promised. And then, the shadows swallowed the room whole. Jonathan woke up on the floor of the library, gasping for breath. Had it been real? A nightmare? His fingers trembled as he reached for the books on the shelf, flipping frantically through pages. And then he found it. An old ledger, marked with the seal of Edward Blackwood. The final entry read, "The debt has not been paid. Until my bloodline is gone, he will come for us all." Jonathan's stomach twisted. The thing in the house wasn't just a ghost. It was a debt collector, and he was the last name on its list. Jonathan had to act fast. Somewhere in the manor there had to be a way to break the curse. If his ancestor had struck a deal with something, perhaps there was a way to undo it. Harold, at first, refused to help. "There is no undoing it," he whispered. "You can only run." But Jonathan wasn't willing to accept that. He scoured the manor, finding old letters, hidden rooms, and finally, a ritual. A way to bind the entity once and for all. But the ritual came with a terrible cost. A sacrifice. A life for a life. Jonathan clenched his fists. If he wanted to survive, someone else had to die. That night, the entity came for him. Jonathan stood in the grand hall, candles flickering around him. The ancient symbols he had drawn on the floor glowed faintly in the dim light. As the shadows surged forward, he spoke. The final incantation. A scream tore through the house. The entity thrashed, its form twisting, writhing. But the ritual was working. For the first time in centuries, the thing was weak. But then, Jonathan realized the final step of the ritual required something he hadn't considered. The Blackwood bloodline had to end. If he lived, so would the curse. For a long moment, Jonathan hesitated, and then he made his choice. The next morning, the sun rose over Blackwood Manor. The caretaker, Harold, stood at the gates, watching. For the first time in centuries, the house was silent. But whether the curse had ended or simply moved on, no one could say. And far away, in a distant town, a young woman named Emily Blackwood received a letter, the deed to a house she had never heard of. Her hands trembled, and in the empty corners of her room, something watched. Emily Blackwood stared at the letter in her hands. She had never heard of a Blackwood estate, let alone an inheritance in her name. At first, she thought it was a scam. Some distant relative leaving behind an old house in the countryside? Too convenient. But then, she saw the seal. The wax imprint was cold to the touch, and when she traced her fingers over it, a sharp whisper curled around her ears. "Come home." Emily shivered. Something told her. She had no choice. The Blackwood Manor stood exactly as described, a decayed monument to a forgotten past. The air smelled of rotting wood and time. The front gate screeched as she pushed it open, the rust flaking beneath her fingers. Inside, the grand hall was empty, yet she felt watched. Dust coated every surface, but the portraits, they were pristine. Faces of long-dead ancestors, their hollow eyes staring at her as if waiting. Emily swallowed hard. Why does it feel like this house has been expecting me? That night, Emily searched the house. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe proof that this was all some bizarre joke. Instead, she found a journal. It belonged to Jonathan Graves. Final entry read, "The only way to break the curse is to end the Blackwood line. I failed. If you are reading this, you are next." Emily's breath caught. A loud knock echoed through the empty hall. And then, the candles blew out. Darkness pressed around her. Emily scrambled for her phone, flicking on the flashlight. The shadows seemed to move, twisting unnaturally along the walls. Then, a voice. "Emily, leave before it wakes." She spun around. No one was there. Her breath hitched. The whisper wasn't just in the room. It was inside her head. And behind her, in the reflection of an old mirror, a figure stood watching. Emily knew she had to leave, but the doors wouldn't open. No matter how hard she pulled, the heavy wooden entrance refused to budge. A gust of cold air wrapped around her, carrying the scent of something rotten. Then, the fireplace roared to life, illuminating the figure sitting in the high-backed chair. It wasn't human. It wore Jonathan's face. "You cannot leave." Emily's blood ran cold. Jonathan, or what remained of him, smiled. "Unless you take my place." The next morning, Emily found Harold Finch, the old caretaker, lurking in the greenhouse. His hands trembled as he held a rusted dagger. "You should have never come here," he rasped. Emily grabbed his arm. "Tell me what's going on." Harold's eyes darkened. Edward Blackwood made a pact, but he never paid the price. The debt falls on the last heir. That's you, girl. Emily's stomach twisted. "What happens if I refuse?" Harold hesitated. "The house won't let you." That night, Emily locked herself in her room. She thought she was safe, but the house had other plans. The moment she closed her eyes, the whispers returned. "Say the oath. Say it, or we will take you." Her body locked in place. Her own hands moved against her will, carving symbols into her skin with an invisible force. The candles flickered. The whispers became screams. And then, a single voice rose above them all. "The debt must be paid in blood." Emily gasped awake, her body drenched in sweat. On the walls, written in her own hand, were the words, "One must die, so the rest can live." Emily knew she had two choices. Find a way to destroy the entity and break the curse forever. Give in, and let someone else take her place. Harold begged her to run. "The last heir always dies," he said. "There's no breaking the curse, only passing it on." But Emily refused. There had to be another way, even if it meant facing the entity itself. Emily returned to the library, searching Jonathan's journal for a way out. She found the answer hidden in the margins. The curse can be broken if the firstborn heir reclaims the debt. Her mind spun. The firstborn heir wasn't her. It was Edward Blackwood, the man who started it all. Which meant she had to bring him back. That night, Emily lit the candles in the grand hall. The air grew heavy, the shadows pressing in. As she spoke the ancient words, the walls groaned, the house shuddering as if waking from a long sleep. And then, the fireplace erupted in flames. A figure stepped through. Edward Blackwood had returned, but he was not alone. The entity came with him, and it was angry. Emily knew she had to act fast. The entity lunged for her, its form a writhing mass of shadows and screams. But Emily was ready. She slashed her palm with the dagger, pressing her blood against the cursed sigil on the floor. The house shook violently, the walls cracking. Edward screamed, his body disintegrating as the entity dragged him into the abyss. For the first time in centuries, the curse had a new owner, and it was finally complete. The shadows receded, the house went silent, and when Emily opened her eyes, she was alone. The Blackwood curse was over, or so she thought, because, in the darkness of the abandoned house, a new letter was being written, sealed in wax, waiting for the next heir to claim it. For the first time in centuries, The Blackwood Manor was quiet. Emily Blackwood had done the impossible. The curse was broken. The whispers had faded. The whispers. The walls no longer groaned with the weight of ancient sins. She should have felt relieved, but she didn't, because deep down, she knew. Curses don't die. They change. Emily had left the house 3 weeks ago, settling into a small apartment in the city. She told herself the nightmares would fade with time. But they didn't. Each night she woke up at 3:13 a.m., heart pounding. And each time, she smelled smoke, not from her apartment, from the Blackwood Manor. Something was calling her back, and she was terrified to answer. By the 4th week, Emily couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The letters started arriving, unsigned, written in her own handwriting. Come home. So, against her better judgment, she drove back to Blackwood Manor. But when she stepped onto the property, she felt it immediately. The house was not empty. Something had woken up, and it was waiting for her. Emily's hands shook as she unlocked the front door. She had sealed this place before leaving. Every window boarded up, every door locked. And yet, the grand hall was untouched. The candles flickered to life on their own. And worst of all, the library door which she had nailed shut now stood wide open. The shadows inside shifted, moving like they were alive. She took a step closer. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight. And then, a book flew off the shelf. Emily's breath caught. The title sent a chill through her spine. The Blackwood Line, A Debt Never Settled. Emily flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling. It detailed the curse's origin. But there was something new, something she hadn't read before. If the heir survives the cleansing, the debt remains unpaid. The entity does not vanish. It transforms. Her stomach twisted. Had she misunderstood? Had she only delayed the inevitable? A whisper slithered through the room. You thought you ended it. You only changed the rules. Emily turned sharply and froze, because standing in the doorway was Jonathan Graves. Except Jonathan was dead. And the thing wearing his face was smiling. Emily ran. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the front door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. The house was alive again. The floorboards shuddered. The chandelier swung violently. Emily grabbed the dagger from the mantel. She had left it behind when she fled. Jonathan, or whatever had become of him, tilted his head. You can't kill me, Emily. The walls groaned as the temperature dropped. Because now, I am the house. Emily stabbed forward, but Jonathan's body twisted unnaturally, dodging with ease, and then his flesh split apart, revealing something else underneath. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting. Emily stumbled backward as its true form emerged. A writhing mass of shadow and bone, its voice now everywhere. You freed me from my cage, but you didn't destroy me. Her mind spun. The curse hadn't ended. It had escaped. And now, it was unstoppable. Emily knew she had one chance. She couldn't kill the entity, but she could trap it again. She flipped through Jonathan's journal, looking for anything she might have missed, and then she found it. The house is the prison, but it needs a warden. Emily's breath caught. To seal the entity away, someone had to stay behind. Someone had to become the next guardian. She clenched her fists. There was no way she was giving up her life for this place. Which meant she needed to find someone else to take her place. Emily had one name in mind. Harold Finch. The old caretaker had warned her before, but he had also kept secrets. And if anyone deserved to be trapped here forever, It was him. She found him in the greenhouse, tending to the dead vines. When he saw her, his face paled. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispered. Emily smiled. Coldly, "Neither should you." Emily didn't hesitate. She cut her palm, letting the blood drip onto the sigil in the library. The air crackled as the entity's form shuddered, drawn back into the walls. But it wasn't enough. The ritual needed a host. Harold realized too late. Emily shoved him forward, his body collapsing onto the sigil. The house seized him instantly, the shadows wrapping around him like vines. His screams echoed through the halls. And then, silence. The house went still. The curse had a new warden. Emily exhaled. It was over. For now. Emily walked away from Blackwood Manor one last time. The house no longer called to her. The whispers had faded. She was finally free. But as she got into her car, she saw something in the rearview mirror. A shadow in the manor's highest window, watching, waiting. And though Harold's mouth was sealed shut, she swore she heard his voice whisper, "See you soon." Emily Blackwood had escaped Blackwood Manor. She had tricked the entity, forced Harold Finch to take her place as the warden, and left without looking back. For the first time in her life, she felt free. But freedom is often just an illusion. Because, in the dark corners of her mind, in the silence of the night, she still heard him. "Harold, you didn't end it, Emily. You just passed it on." Emily tried to start over. She moved to another city, changed her name, and buried the past. But no matter how far she ran, the mark on her wrist remained. The scar from the ritual never healed, and, worse, it was spreading. Veins of black ink crawled up her arm, branching like roots. The curse hadn't stayed behind. It had followed her. Emily ignored the signs at first, the flickering lights, the whispers in the hallway, the reflection in the mirror that wasn't quite her own. But when she woke up one night, to find Harold sitting at the foot of her bed, she knew the truth. He wasn't just haunting the manor. He was haunting her. Emily searched through the old books she had taken from the manor, and that's when she found it. A warden may be chosen, but the first heir is forever bound. Her stomach dropped. She had passed on the roll, but not the curse. The Blackwood curse was still inside her. And Harold wasn't just a ghost. He was her replacement. And now he was, coming to claim her. The haunting escalated. The shadows moved faster. The walls in her apartment shifted, revealing glimpses of Blackwood Manor. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred. Then, one night, at 3:13 a.m., she woke up in her bed, inside the manor. She had never left. The curse had never let her go, and Harold was waiting for her. Harold stood in the grand hall, his face twisted into something inhuman. "You thought you could escape?" he whispered. Emily stepped back. The doors slammed shut. The walls groaned. House itself was waking up, stronger than ever. "You freed me," Harold said, his voice slithering like smoke. "Now, it's time for me to return the favor." The shadows lunged at Emily, but this time, she was ready. She grabbed the ancient dagger, the one she had once used to fight the entity, and she did the only thing left to do. She stabbed herself. Pain exploded through her chest. The dagger drank, her blood soaking the sigil beneath her feet. And as she collapsed, she heard Harold scream. The shadows shattered, the walls cracked, and the entire manor trembled. Emily's vision faded, and for a moment, she thought she had won. Then she opened her eyes and found herself standing in the grand hall again, but this time, she was the one in Harold's place. She was the new warden, and the doors were sealed forever. The years passed. The house remained silent. Until, one day, a young girl wandered onto the property. Emily watched her from the highest window, just as Harold had once watched her. The girl looked curious, intrigued, and Emily felt something inside her stir. A whisper slid through the air, her whisper, "Come home," and the cycle began again. Emily pressed her palm to the window. She had once been the victim, then she had been the survivor. Now, she was the warden. And soon, she would need to find her replacement. The rain battered against the windshield as Jane Reed tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The highway stretched endlessly before her, disappearing into the dense fog that clung to the road like a ghostly shroud. The GPS flickered, struggling to keep its signal, but she didn't need directions. She knew exactly where she was going. Back home, a place she had vowed never to return to. Her phone lay on the passenger seat, the call from Samuel Turner still replaying in her mind. His voice had been tight with fear, trembling with something deeper than mere unease. "Please, you have to come. The house, it's waking up again. It whispers. It calls for you." Jane's stomach twisted as she recalled those words. Again. The house had always been alive, a thing of shadows and secrets. As a child, she had heard the whispers creeping through the walls, voices that slithered into her dreams, promising things she didn't understand. She had tried to ignore them until the night her father disappeared. The house had swallowed him whole. Now, 20 years later, she was going back. She pulled off the highway, taking the winding dirt road that led to Black Hollow, the desolate town she once called home. It had always felt abandoned, even when people lived there. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and the trees lining the road seemed taller, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. The moment the house came into view, Jane's breath caught in her throat. It was just as she remembered. 3 stories tall, blackened wood, a sagging porch, and windows like empty eyes staring into the night. The house had not aged. It had rotted, decayed in its own silence. Samuel Turner stood on the porch, his figure a hunched shadow against the dim porch light. He looked older than she expected, deep lines carved into his face. He had been the house's caretaker, left with the impossible task of keeping it sealed. Jane stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting into her skin. Samuel watched her warily. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," Jane exhaled sharply. "I shouldn't have." His eyes flickered toward the house. "It knows you're here." A chill ran down Jane's spine. She turned toward the looming structure, her childhood memories stirring like ghosts. The house seemed to breathe, the wood groaning under its own weight. Something was waiting for her inside. Jane set her bags down in the dusty hallway, her fingers brushing against the wooden walls. The house smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic like old blood. Samuel had left her alone. He refused to stay after dark. As she walked through the house, memories clawed their way back. The flickering hallway lights. The old grandfather. Clock that had stopped ticking the night her father vanished. The basement door, sealed with thick iron locks. Her childhood room was untouched, covered in a thick layer of dust. The old bed, the cracked mirror, the bookshelf filled with forgotten fairy tales. And then there was the doll. Jane's breath hitched. It sat in the corner, exactly where she had left it 20 years ago. A porcelain doll with faded blue eyes and a smile that seemed too wide. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It was light, too light. Then she heard it. A whisper. Her blood ran cold as she turned toward the mirror. A shadow moved behind her. Jane spun around, heart hammering against her ribs. Nothing, but she could feel it, the house watching. She set the doll down carefully and left the room, locking the door behind her. The house groaned again. Something was awake. The next morning, Jane decided to investigate the house. She ran her fingers along the walls, feeling for hidden compartments, places her father might have kept secrets. In the old study, she found a journal tucked inside a drawer. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed with time. Her father's handwriting was frantic, uneven. The key is the answer. The key must never be used. If she finds it, it will wake him. A key. Jane's heart pounded as she scanned the room. Then she saw it. The porcelain doll. It was no longer in her room. It sat on the desk. Jane's hands trembled as she picked it up. She turned it over, her breath catching as she felt something shifting inside. She pried open the back panel and a rusted iron key fell into her palm. The moment her fingers closed around it, the air in the room changed. A whisper slithered through the walls, faint and insidious. She has it now. She has it now. The lights flickered, the shadows grew darker, and then a loud bang echoed through the house. The basement door had unlocked itself. Jane stood frozen, the key burning cold in her hand. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the walls. She took a step forward, then another. The basement door loomed before her, slightly ajar. The iron locks that had sealed it for 2 decades now lay scattered on the floor. As she reached out to push it open, a hand shot out from the darkness beyond. Gray, withered hand with long, claw-like fingers. Jane screamed, stumbling backward as the door slammed shut. A voice rasped from behind the door. "You shouldn't have come back, Jane." Her heart pounded. It knew her name. She staggered away, her breaths ragged, her mind racing. Something was inside the basement, something that had been waiting for her return. And now, it was awake. Jane sat on the floor of the old study, her breath ragged, her fingers gripping the iron key so tightly that the rusted edges dug into her skin. The basement door had slammed shut, but the whispers continued. Soft, insidious voices curling through the walls, as if something beneath the house had awakened. Her mind screamed at her to leave, but she couldn't. Not after what she had heard. "You shouldn't have come back, Jane." It had spoken her name. A cold shudder ran down her spine. She forced herself to stand, her legs unsteady. The house was different now, alive in a way she had never experienced before. The air itself hummed, with unseen energy. She turned toward the desk, her father's journal still open. Her eyes scanned his final entry. "If the key is found, the barrier will weaken. It cannot be undone. If you hear his voice, you must not answer. Do not open the door. Do not believe his lies." The air in the room turned frigid. Then, thud. A heavy knock, coming from inside the basement. Jane took a step back. Another knock, louder this time. Then, the voice came again. "Jane, please, let me out." It wasn't the growling, monstrous voice she had heard earlier. This one was soft, human, familiar. Her blood ran cold. It was her father's voice. Jane's chest tightened. She hadn't heard her father's voice in 20 years. The last time she saw him, he had been dragged into the darkness of the basement, his screams swallowed by the house. Now, his voice was on the other side of the door. "Ellie, sweetheart, please, it's me." Tears welled in her eyes. No, it couldn't be. Her fingers curled, around the iron key. Her father's journal had warned her, "Do not believe his lies." But what if She turned the key over in her hands, her mind warring with itself. Then she saw it. The doll. It sat in the corner of the study again, watching her. Her breath hitched. She had left it upstairs, and now its lips were moving. "Don't open the door, Jane," Jane gasped, stumbling backward. The doll's porcelain face cracked, as if something inside was trying to break free. A low scratching noise came from behind the basement door. The thing inside had heard the doll's warning, and it wasn't happy. Jane staggered out of the study, slamming the door behind her. Her heart pounded as she gripped the key, the whispers pressing against her skull. She had to get out. Now. She sprinted down the hallway, her breath coming in gasps. The front door loomed ahead, her escape. Then, boom. The door slammed shut on its own, the locks twisting into place. The house had sealed itself. Cold dread settled in her chest. The air grew heavier, the shadows deepening. Then, something moved in. The darkness. A figure. Tall. Hollow. Wrong. It stood at the end of the hallway, just out of the flickering light. It had no eyes, no face, just a gaping void where its head should be. The Hollow Man. It reached out, its fingers elongating, scraping against the walls. Jane choked on a sob, stepping backward. The whispers rose to a deafening roar. The Hollow Man took a step forward. The walls began to bleed, and Jane finally understood. She had already lost. The house wanted blood. Jane ran. Her feet pounded against the wooden floor as she fled deeper into the house, the shadows chasing her. Every door she tried was locked. The Hollow Man's voice slithered through the darkness. "You brought me back, Jane." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She reached the old attic stairs, the only place left to run. With a final breath, she bolted up the steps. The door slammed shut behind her. Darkness swallowed her whole. And then, a single candle flickered to life. She wasn't alone. Something breathed behind her, slow, ragged, waiting. Jane turned, and the last thing she saw was a face she hadn't seen in 20 years. Her father. Except his eyes were gone, and his mouth stretched, too wide. He smiled. "You should have never come back, sweetheart." The candle went out. Darkness consumed her, and the screams began. Jane woke up in darkness. Her breath shuddered as she sat up, her hands trembling against the wooden floor. Her father's voice still echoed in her head. "You should have never come back, sweetheart." But was it really her father? No, it couldn't be. Her heart pounded as she reached out, feeling for the candle that had flickered out. Her fingers brushed against something wet. She recoiled. The iron key was still clutched in her other hand, warm now, as if it had been absorbing the heat of her body. Then, the floorboards creaked. Something was in the attic with her. She turned slowly, barely breathing. A shadow moved in the corner, shifting against the dim glow of moonlight filtering through the cracks in the ceiling. Then, she saw them. 2 hands, pale, thin, crawling toward her. Her breath hitched. The thing in the dark wasn't walking. It was dragging itself across the floor. A broken body. A twisted soul. A forgotten past. Jane scrambled backward. But then, it spoke. The ritual must be finished. Jane staggered to her feet, her back pressed against the attic wall. The thing in the dark had stopped moving. It crouched in the shadows, watching her. Then, it pointed, not at her, at the old wooden chest in the corner of the attic. A familiar chest. Her father's. Her throat tightened. She hadn't seen that since she was a child. Slowly, cautiously, she approached it, the iron key heavier than ever in her hand. The moment she touched the chest, the room shifted. The walls groaned, the air thickened, and a wave of whispers flooded her mind. She forced the lid open. Inside was a journal. Its pages were yellowed, the ink smudged with time. Her father's handwriting covered the first page. The house is not haunted by ghosts. It is haunted by something much worse. Jane's blood ran cold. She flipped to the last entry. The ritual was never completed. If the key is turned, the Hollow Man will be free. He will consume the house, and everyone inside it. The only way to stop it is to finish what was started. Jane's hands shook. Her father had known, and he had tried to stop it. But now she had already turned the key, and the Hollow Man was awake. Jane barely had time to react. A sudden boom shook the attic. The walls cracked, thick veins of black liquid oozing from the wood. The house was alive, and it was angry. The whispers rose into screams. She grabbed the journal and the key, shoving them into her coat pocket, then turned toward the attic door. The figure in the shadows had vanished, but the echo of its voice still remained. The ritual must be finished. Jane's pulse hammered as she yanked open the attic door and froze. The hallway outside was different. The walls were stained red, the floor warped like something was breathing beneath it. And at the end of the hallway, a door stood open, the basement door, waiting for her. She took a step forward, the air growing colder with each movement. Then, the doll appeared again, sitting in the middle of the hallway. Only this time, its mouth was wide open. Jane's breath hitched. Inside the doll's mouth was a set of human teeth, and they were smiling at her. Jane ran. She sprinted down the hallway, past the doll, past the whispering walls, straight toward the open basement door. She didn't know why, but something deep inside her told her this was the only way. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her. The basement was pitch black. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. Then, a single candle ignited in the center of the room, and she saw them, symbols, carved into the stone floor. A ritual circle, drawn in what looked like dried blood. Jane swallowed hard. The journal's words burned in her mind. The only way to stop him is to finish what was started. The whispers grew louder, twisting into a distorted voice. You cannot escape me, Jane. She turned, and the Hollow Man stood behind her. Its body towered over her, its arms stretched too long, its face a gaping abyss of darkness. Jane couldn't move. Then it lunged. She threw herself into the ritual circle, the candle's flame flickering wildly. The Hollow Man stopped, its movements jerky, unnatural. The ritual was holding it back. Jane grabbed the journal, flipping to the final page. The words were barely readable, written in a frantic scrawl. To bind the Hollow Man, a sacrifice must be made. A life for a life. Her hands trembled. Sacrifice. A life. The realization hit her like a bullet. Her father had tried to stop the ritual, but he hadn't completed it. That's why he was still here. Trapped. Jane's breath shuddered. The Hollow Man stepped forward, its arms pushing against the ritual's barrier. The candle flickered again. The barrier was weakening. She had seconds to decide. Her life, or someone else's. And then she heard the voice. Soft. Faint. Ellie. Let me go. Her father's voice. Her real father. Tears filled her eyes. She knew what she had to do. She grabbed the iron key, pressed it against her palm, and whispered the final words of the ritual. The candle burst into flames. The hollow man let out an ear-splitting shriek. And then everything went dark. Jane's body trembled as she stood in the center of the ritual circle. The iron key burned in her hand, its edges digging into her palm. The hollow man lurked just beyond the candlelight, its elongated limbs twitching, its faceless void pulsing with a hunger that defied reality itself. Her father's voice lingered in her ears. "Ellie, let me go." Her throat tightened. She turned the final page of the journal, her vision blurred with fear and grief. A sacrifice must be made. A life for a life. Her father had been the one who started the ritual. That meant his soul was still bound to the hollow man, the reason the house was bleeding, the reason the shadows whispered his name. Tears burned down her cheeks. If she completed the ritual, if she gave him up, she would never hear his voice again. But if she didn't, the hollow man would consume her soul instead. Her hands shook as she knelt in the circle, whispering the words from the journal, her voice hoarse. "With the binding key I seal the past." The hollow man lunged forward. The air thickened, pressing against her ribs like invisible hands. "With blood undone I set thee free." A gust of wind tore through the basement, whipping her hair across her face. The candle flickered violently, and then a hand touched her shoulder. Her father. She turned, and his eyes were filled with a sorrow deeper than death itself. "Finish it, Ellie," he whispered. Tears spilled over. She clenched her jaw, gripping the iron key so tightly that her skin split open. Blood dripped onto the ritual circle. The hollow man screamed. The moment the blood hit the floor, the candle exploded into blue flames, sending shadows thrashing across the walls. The house groaned, and the hollow man's form began to unravel. It clawed at the air, its distorted voice merging with 1,000 others, its body stretching into oblivion. Her father took a step back, his figure growing fainter. "I love you, Jane." She reached for him, but he was already gone. Then everything stopped. The candle's flames vanished. The air settled. The house was silent. Jane's body collapsed onto the stone floor, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. She was alive. She had won. She forced herself to sit up, her body aching from exhaustion. The basement looked different. No more blood-stained walls. No more twisted shadows whispering in the dark. The house had released its curse. Slowly, she pulled herself to her feet. The journal lay open beside her, its pages blank, as if the past had finally been erased. The iron key, once burning hot, was now cold and lifeless in her hand. She knew what she had to do. With a deep breath, she climbed the stairs and stepped out of the basement into a world that finally felt real again. The first thing Jane noticed was the air. It was clean. No more musty, rotting stench. But something still felt wrong. She stepped into the living room and froze. The front door was wide open. A cold breeze drifted in, carrying a sound that made her stomach churn. Laughter. Not hers. Not her father's. Something else. She turned slowly, and then she saw it, a shadow, standing in the hallway mirror, watching her. Its mouth curved into a grin. A deep, whispering voice crawled through her mind. "Did you really think it was over?" Her blood ran cold. The Hollow Man was never gone. It was still here, still watching, still waiting. And Jane had just let it out. Jane stood frozen in the living room. The whisper had not come from inside her head. It had come from the mirror. The shadowy figure inside it grinned wider, its mouth stretching beyond human limits. A deep, hollow voice crawled through the air. "You opened the door, Jane. You let me in." Her pulse thundered in her ears. No. No, she had completed the ritual. She had ended this nightmare, hadn't she? A cold gust of wind swept through the room, rattling the old chandelier. The shadows around her lengthened, curling like fingers across the floor. Jane took one shaky step back. The air in the house shifted. It was awake, and it was hungry. Something had gone horribly wrong. Her father's sacrifice should have ended everything, but instead it had set something free. Jane stumbled back, gripping the iron key in her pocket like a lifeline. She had one chance left, one final option. The journal had mentioned a second key, a forbidden key, the one that didn't just seal spirits away, it erased them completely. Her father had hidden it, warning that some things should never be unmade. But Jane had no choice. She ran upstairs, her breath shallow. She tore through his study, flinging open drawers, pulling books off the shelves. Nothing. Then, her gaze fell on the old grandfather clock, the one that had never worked. Her hands trembled as she reached out and pushed. The clock groaned, then slid open. A hidden compartment. Inside, a small, rusted box. She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside lay a single silver key, its edges engraved with strange symbols. The moment her fingers brushed it, the whispers stopped. The house fell silent, as if it was watching, waiting. Because Jane had just found the key to destroying it. She barely had time to react. The moment she turned, something slammed into her. She was thrown backward, the silver key flying from her grip. She hit the bookshelf hard, books collapsing around her. Darkness swirled at the edges of her vision. Through the blur, she saw it, a shadow crawling from the mirror, its limbs stretching like liquid, its head twitching unnaturally. It had left the mirror. It was in the room with her. A sickening voice slithered through the air. "You shouldn't have found that key, Jane." She scrambled back, heart hammering. The Hollow Man. It was more than a ghost. It was something older, something that had been waiting for centuries to escape. And now it had. Jane's breath hitched. She reached for the silver key, but a blackened, rotting hand grabbed her wrist, cold. So cold it burned. Her scream choked in her throat. She looked up and saw its face, or rather, the lack of one. A dark, gaping void stared back at her, shifting, twisting, and then it spoke. "You belong to me now." Darkness swallowed her whole. Jane awoke in pure darkness, a place where sound didn't exist, where the air was thick as tar, pressing down on her lungs. She wasn't in the house anymore. She was inside it, the Hollow Man's world, the place where her father's soul had been trapped for years. She tried to move, but hands grabbed her from the shadows. Whispers crawled around her, voices speaking in languages she didn't understand. And then, a single voice cut through the others. "Ellie, run!" Her father, weak, faint, but alive. Somewhere in this endless void, he was still here. She forced herself to move, pushing through the thick air, searching, reaching. The voices howled in fury, but she didn't stop. Finally, she saw it. Figure, chained to the darkness, barely visible. Her father. His eyes met hers, wide with disbelief. Ellie? How? She reached for him, and the moment their hands touched, a shockwave of cold surged through her. A laugh echoed all around them. The hollow man wasn't trying to stop her. It had wanted this. Because now, it had both of them. The shadows swarmed, pain ripped through Jane's chest. She screamed, and then everything went black. Darkness, heavy, suffocating, endless. Jane's scream died in the thick black nothingness. She wasn't alone. Hands, cold, decayed, inhuman, crawled over her arms, her legs. The Hollow Man's realm wasn't just a prison, it was a feeding ground. The whispers circled her like predators, voices blending together. Stay with us, Jane. Let go. Become one of us. No. She wouldn't. Her father's voice had cut through the void once. She would find him again. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her pocket. The silver key was still there. A single weapon against a world of darkness. She gripped it tightly. It was her only way out. But she needed to find her father first. She moved through the shifting blackness, pushing forward. The ground didn't exist, but somehow she could walk. Shapes emerged from the dark, faces, hundreds of trapped souls, staring with empty, hollow eyes. Each one had been taken by the Hollow Man. Each one had once tried to fight back. Now, they were part of it. A hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. She gasped, but the grip was gentle. Ellie, her father. He looked weaker, like the darkness was draining him away. You shouldn't have come. Tears stung her eyes. I'm not leaving you here. He shook his head. It won't let us go. A deep, shuddering voice rippled through the void. Oh, but you can leave, Jane, if you give me something in return. The Hollow Man was speaking to her directly now. She turned and saw it. A massive, shifting shadow, its form stretching into infinity. Eyes, hundreds of them, opened within its body, watching, unblinking. I will let you go, if you leave him behind. Jane's breath caught. It was giving her an option, but she knew it was a lie. If she left, it wouldn't let her go fully. It would drag her back one way or another, and worse, her father would be lost forever. She gripped the silver key. She only had one chance. I'm not making a deal with you. The Hollow Man laughed, a sound that shook the entire void. Then you will stay. The darkness surged forward, closing in. But Jane was ready. She threw the silver key to her father. Use it! He caught it, and the shadows screamed. Light erupted from the key. The darkness reeled back, hissing, shrieking. Her father clutched the key, whispering words, ancient words, the same ones their ancestors had once used to banish evil. The Hollow Man thrashed, its form breaking apart. You cannot destroy me! It roared. But it was afraid. For the first time, it was afraid. Jane grabbed her father's hand. Say the last line with me. Together, they spoke the final words of the ritual, and then, a deafening explosion of light. The void. Shattered, the Hollow Man screamed, its body dissolving into nothing. The souls, all the trapped souls began to rise, freed from its grasp. Jane and her father fell. Jane's eyes snapped open. She gasped, sitting up. She was back in the house. The air was still. No whispers. No shadows. Her father lay beside her, unconscious but breathing. She touched his face, relief washing over her. It was over. They had won. But as she looked around, she saw it. the mirror, a single handprint on the glass. And then, a whisper. "I'll be back, Jane." The glass cracked. 1 year later. Jane and her father had moved away, far from the cursed house. But deep down, she knew. The Hollow Man wasn't truly gone. It had just been pushed back, waiting, watching. For the next time someone would open the door, she looked at her reflection, and for a split second, she saw its grin staring back at her. Elisa Harper had always found comfort in silence. It wasn't that she disliked people. She simply preferred the soft hum of a world at rest rather than the clamor of voices demanding her attention. That was perhaps why she had chosen to be a hospice nurse. It was a job that required patience, solitude, and the ability to sit quietly in a room where life itself seemed to be thinning into something unspoken. The drive to Holloway House was long and winding. The roads leading up to it were narrow, framed by towering trees that whispered secrets in the cold wind. The sky hung low, painted in shades of gray that threatened rain. Elisa checked the address again. 267 Willow Lane. The estate was tucked far from town, nestled in a forgotten stretch of countryside where time seemed to pause. When she finally pulled up to the property, she felt a strange weight settle over her. The house was older than she had expected, its Victorian structure standing against the wind like a relic refusing to crumble. The paint had peeled in places, revealing darkened wood underneath. The windows were tall and narrow, their glass clouded with time. It wasn't an abandoned house, but it had the look of one, as if something had been waiting too long inside. She cut the engine and stepped out, her boots crunching against the gravel driveway. There was a stillness to the place, something pressing and unseen. The trees didn't move, though she could feel the wind against her cheek. The windows of the house were dark, reflecting nothing but the dull sky. Elisa sighed, adjusted her coat, and moved toward the front door. The door opened before Elisa could knock. A thin man in a neatly pressed suit stood in the entrance, his expression unreadable. He looked like he had been expecting her, though there was no warmth in his eyes. "You must be Miss Harper," he said. His voice was as crisp as his attire. "I'm Charles Whitmore, Ms. Holloway's estate lawyer. She's been waiting." Elisa gave a polite nod and stepped inside. The house smelled of age, dust, books, and something faintly sweet, like dried roses long past their bloom. The wooden floors creaked beneath her steps, and the high ceilings made the space feel cavernous. Margaret Holloway was older than she had expected. The woman sat in an armchair by the fireplace, draped in a thick shawl, her frail hands resting on her lap. Her eyes, though clouded with time, were sharp as they settled on Elisa. "You're late," Margaret murmured. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Elisa hesitated. "I'm sorry, Miss Holloway. The roads were—" Margaret raised a thin hand, silencing her. "It doesn't matter." Then her gaze darkened, and she said something that made Elisa's skin prickle. "You shouldn't have come." The room seemed to close in around them. Elisa swallowed, forcing a smile. "I'm here to take care of you." Margaret didn't respond. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the darkened hallway behind Elisa, as if something else had entered. The room. Chapter 3. A house that watches. Elisa settled into the house quickly. She had been given a small bedroom on the second floor, tucked away at the end of the hall. The room was simple. Just a bed, a wooden dresser, and a window overlooking the overgrown garden. It was cold, no matter how many blankets she used. She spent her days tending to Margaret, bringing her meals, reading to her, making sure she took her medication, but Margaret barely spoke, except for the occasional murmured sentence that made no sense. "She's listening," she had whispered one night as Elisa adjusted her pillows. Elisa frowned. "Who's listening?" Margaret didn't answer. She simply turned her head away, staring at the empty corner of the room. The house itself was unsettling. The floors creaked even when she wasn't moving. Shadows stretched too far at night, and the walls felt like they were breathing in the quiet. She would catch glimpses of something in the mirrors, a shape, a flicker of movement, but when she turned, there was nothing there. One night, as she was heading to bed, she saw something odd. The hallway was long and dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. As she reached her door, she happened to glance down the corridor toward Margaret's room. The door was open, and a figure stood just inside. Elisa's breath caught. It wasn't Margaret. This figure was taller, its silhouette slightly blurred in the dim light. She blinked, and it was gone. The door to Margaret's room was closed. The next morning, Elisa decided to ignore what she had seen. It was just exhaustion, she told herself. The mind played tricks in old houses. But then Margaret spoke again. "You're her," the old woman whispered. Elisa frowned. "Who?" Margaret reached out, her fingers ice cold, gripping Elisa's wrist. "Abigail." The name sent a chill down her spine. "I don't know anyone by that name," Elisa said gently. Margaret's eyes were distant, lost in time. "You look just like her," she whispered. "That's why she won't let you leave." Elisa pulled her hand away, unsettled. "Who won't let me leave?" Margaret just smiled, the pretty thing that lives in the house. Chapter 5. The Locked Door. That night, Elisa woke to a knocking sound. It was soft, rhythmic, like someone tapping their fingernails against the wood. She sat up, heart pounding. It was coming from the other side of the wall that connected her room to the one that had remained locked since she arrived. Slowly, she got up and stepped into the hallway. The air was cold, and the floorboards groaned beneath her feet. She turned toward the locked door and saw something that made her blood run cold. The doorknob was turning. Someone was inside the locked room. She took a step back, fear clawing at her throat. Then, suddenly, the knob stopped moving, and a whisper came from the other side of the door. "Elisa." She ran back to her room, slamming the door shut, heart hammering. She wasn't alone in the house. Something else was there, and it knew her name. Elisa barely slept after the incident with the locked door. Every creak of the house felt amplified, in the silence, and she swore she could hear faint murmurs through the walls. It wasn't just the house settling, no. This was something else. The next morning, she found herself moving cautiously, every shadow feeling heavier than before. She had planned to question Margaret about the name Abigail and what she had meant the night before. But when she stepped into the old woman's room, she found her staring at the window, unblinking. The curtains swayed, though there was no wind. "Miss Holloway?" Elisa spoke softly. Margaret slowly turned her head, her expression distant. Then she smiled. "She was watching you last night, wasn't she?" Elisa's stomach tightened. "Who?" Margaret chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "You know who." Elisa's hands clenched at her sides. She could feel something was wrong, something that had been waiting inside this house for far too long. She needed answers. After breakfast, Elisa made her way to the locked room. She ran her fingers over the old wooden door, hesitating before gripping the handle. It was cold to the touch. Slowly she twisted it. Locked. She exhaled, pressing her forehead against the door. If something was in there, she needed to know what. That's when she noticed the keyhole. Bending down, she peered through it. At first, she saw nothing. Just darkness. Then, suddenly, a flash of white fabric. Someone was standing just beyond the door. Her breath hitched, and she stumbled back. No, it had to be a trick of the light, but deep inside, she knew she wasn't alone. Later that evening, Elisa found Charles Whitmore, the estate lawyer, in the study, flipping through an old ledger. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, trying to sound composed. "This house, it has a history, doesn't it?" Whitmore's hand paused over the pages. He didn't look up. "Every house has a history. That locked room, who lived there?" Whitmore finally raised his eyes to meet hers. For the first time, there was something behind them. Hesitation. "You shouldn't ask about things best left forgotten," he said. Elisa's frustration boiled over. "I hear whispers in the walls. I see shadows in the mirrors. Margaret calls. Me, Abigail. But I don't know who that is. And last night..." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I just need to know what happened here." A long silence stretched between them. Then Whitmore sighed and closed the ledger. "This house belonged to the Holloway family for centuries," he began. "Margaret had a sister. Her name was Abigail Holloway." Elisa felt her stomach drop. "She went missing in this house over 50 years ago." Elisa sat frozen as Whitmore continued. "She was young, barely 20. People say she was beautiful, always dressed in white. She would wander the house at night, speaking to people who weren't there." Elisa swallowed. "She was mentally ill?" Whitmore shook his head. "No one knows, but one night she disappeared, vanished without a trace." Elisa's fingers dug into the armrest of the chair. "And they never found her?" "No." Whitmore's gaze darkened. "Some say she never left." Elisa exhaled sharply. "That doesn't explain why Margaret keeps calling me Abigail." Whitmore hesitated before speaking again. "You resemble her." A shiver ran through Elisa's spine. "She's still here." Margaret's voice drifted from the hallway. Both Elisa and Whitmore turned to see the frail woman standing in the dim light, her eyes fixed on Elisa. "She's been waiting for you." That night, Elisa couldn't stay still. She needed to know more. With a candle in hand, she began to explore the lower levels of the house. The air was thick with dust, and the wooden floors groaned beneath her steps. As she reached the back of the house, she saw a door she hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar. A cold draft seeped through the crack, and as Elisa stepped closer, she realized it led to the basement. She hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she pushed it open. The wooden stairs creaked under her weight as she descended. The deeper she went, the colder it became. The candlelight flickered, casting moving shadows along the damp stone walls. At the bottom of the stairs she saw it. A mirror. It was massive, old, and covered in dust. The frame was ornate, curling vines and roses etched into its dark wood. Something about it made her chest tighten. She raised the candle, and as the dust cleared, a pale face stared back at her. But it wasn't her own reflection. Elisa gasped and stumbled backward. The candle flickered violently. The face in the mirror tilted its head, eyes wide and hollow. Then, a whisper. "Elisa." The candle went out. Darkness swallowed her, and something moved in the shadows. Elisa's breath came in short, panicked gasps. The candle had gone out, leaving her in total darkness. The cold air in the basement wrapped around her like unseen hands, suffocating and relentless. She squeezed her eyes shut. It's just my mind playing tricks on me. There's no one here. But then the whisper came again. Elisa. Her blood turned to ice. Something was there, watching, waiting. With trembling fingers, she fumbled for the matches in her pocket. Striking one, the small flame flickered to life, revealing the basement in dim, flickering light. The mirror stood in front of her, its surface too dark, too deep, like a pool of ink instead of glass, and in the reflection, she wasn't alone. A figure stood behind her, a woman in white. Elisa spun around, nothing. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest as she turned back to the mirror. The woman was still there, closer this time. Then, the whisper again. Help me. Elisa stumbled backward, nearly falling as she scrambled up the basement stairs. She burst into the hallway, gasping for air, her skin cold with fear. I need to leave now. But then she saw Margaret standing in the dim hallway, watching her. You saw her, didn't you? Margaret's voice was soft, but there was something else beneath it, something knowing. Elisa swallowed hard. Abigail. She's still here, isn't she? Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she turned and shuffled toward the library. Confused but desperate for answers, Elisa followed. Margaret led her to a dusty shelf, her frail hands moving over the spines of books before stopping at an old leather-bound journal. Her diary, Margaret whispered, handing it to Elisa. She wrote everything in here before she disappeared. Elisa hesitated before opening the book. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words still held power. I hear them whisper my name. The house won't let me leave. The mirror is a doorway. Elisa's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The entries became more erratic, Abigail's handwriting growing more desperate. She is watching me now. The girl in the mirror. She wants to take my place. A shiver crawled down Elisa's spine. The girl in the mirror. Had Abigail gone mad? Or had something else, something worse, taken her? Elisa couldn't sleep that night. The words in Abigail's journal burned in her mind. The mirror is a doorway. A doorway to what? She knew she had to go back. Gripping a lantern tightly, she made her way back to the basement. This time, she was ready. The mirror loomed before her, silent and waiting. She raised the lantern. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed and tense. But then it blinked. Elisa hadn't blinked. She sucked in a breath as her reflection slowly, unnaturally, tilted its head. A slow, eerie smile curled its lips. You came back, the reflection whispered. Elisa dropped the lantern. The glass shattered, fire flickering along the floor. Shadows danced along the walls, and for a split second she saw her. A girl in white, standing just beyond the glass. Abigail. But something was wrong. Her face was twisted in a silent scream, her hands pressing against the mirror as if trapped inside. Help me, Abigail mouthed. Elisa staggered back, her mind spinning. If Abigail was inside the mirror, then who was the girl that had taken her place? Elisa felt a rising sense of dread. If Abigail was trapped, had she been replaced by something else? Memories of Margaret's strange behavior surfaced, the way she had called Elisa Abigail. Margaret knew. Elisa stormed into Margaret's room, gripping the old woman's frail shoulders. What happened to Abigail? Margaret's eyes were glassy, distant. Then she whispered, "She was never meant to leave." Elisa's stomach dropped. "Who is in the house with us, Margaret?" Margaret's lips curved into a smile. "She's already here." A cold wind rushed through the room. The lights flickered, and in the mirror across the room, Elisa saw her reflection move, on its own. Everything clicked into place. Abigail had been trapped in the mirror, and something else had taken her place. A creature that could mimic her, pretending to be her. And now, it wanted Elisa. She had to break the cycle. Heart hammering, she grabbed a fire poker from the fireplace and rushed back to the basement. The mirror stood there, waiting. Abigail was still inside, pleading silently. Elisa raised the fire poker and struck the glass. A horrible scream filled the air as cracks splintered across the mirror's surface. A deep, unearthly howl erupted from within, shaking the very foundations of the house. And then the glass shattered. A rush of cold wind blasted through the room. The scream cut off abruptly. Silence followed. Elisa opened her eyes. Abigail was gone. But something was still in the room. Slowly, she turned, and in the darkness behind her, a figure began to rise. The shards of the broken mirror lay scattered across the basement floor. Elisa stood frozen, her breath shallow. The house had gone eerily silent. Abigail was gone, but something else was still here. A shadow moved in the corner of the room. Elisa turned slowly. The darkness shifted, took form. A woman's figure, tall and twisted, emerged from the shadows. It had no face, only a dark, gaping void where eyes should have been. Elisa staggered back. This wasn't Abigail. It whispered, voice like cracking. "Glass, you shouldn't have done that." Elisa fled up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind her. She pressed her back against it, heart racing. The house was different now. The air felt heavier, colder. Margaret was waiting in the hallway, her eyes dull and vacant. "You let her out, didn't you?" Elisa's skin prickled. "Who?" Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the end of the hallway, to a door Elisa had never noticed before. The old woman's voice was barely a whisper. That door was never meant to open. Elisa took a step forward, drawn to it. The wood was old, warped, as if something had been pushing against it from the inside. And then a single knock. The doorknob rattled, Elisa's stomach dropped. Something was on the other side. The journal. Elisa needed to check Abigail's journal again. She rushed back to her room, flipping through the fragile pages, searching for anything about the hidden door. Then she found it. She calls herself Eleanor. She has no face. She lives behind the door. Elisa's breath hitched. Eleanor. She hadn't freed Abigail from the mirror. She had freed Eleanor. Elisa stormed back to Margaret's room, the journal clutched in her shaking hands. "Tell me who she is." Margaret's expression darkened. "She was the first," the old woman whispered. "Before Abigail. Before me. Before all of us." Elisa's blood ran cold. "She's always been here," Margaret continued. "She doesn't belong to this house. The house belongs to her." A chill crept over Elisa's skin. She had been fighting the wrong ghost. She had thought the mirror was the curse. But the real horror had been locked behind that door all along, and now it was free. Elisa woke to the sound of something dragging across the floor. She sat up, her pulse pounding. The hallway outside her room was dark. Then a shadow moved. She reached for her flashlight, but the batteries were dead. Her heart pounded as she crept to the doorway, peeking into the hall. The door at the end of the hallway was wide open, and standing in the doorway, a tall figure dressed in black. No face, no eyes, just a hollow, gaping void. Elisa couldn't breathe. Then, in a voice like shattered glass, it spoke. "You let me out." Margaret was gone. The bed was empty, the sheets still warm. Elisa searched the house desperately, but the moment she stepped into the hallway, the walls seemed to stretch, the shadows deepening. She wasn't alone anymore. The house was awake. A whisper brushed against her ear. "Run!" She turned. A flash of white. "Abigail?" Elisa chased the figure down the hall, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. But when she reached the end, she was back at the basement door. It had been nailed shut from the inside. The journal had one last entry. "She won't let me leave. She needs a new one. She needs a new story." Elisa's hands trembled as she realized she had been writing the next chapter all along. The house didn't just trap ghosts. It created them. Eleanor wasn't just a ghost. She was the author. And Elisa was becoming her next story. The house was changing. Elisa felt it in the way the air thickened around her, in the way the floorboards groaned as if something moved beneath them. The walls, once silent, now carried muffled voices, whispers just beyond understanding. She clutched the journal tightly. She needs a new one. She needs a new story. The realization clawed at her mind. Eleanor was rewriting her. Every choice she made, every step she took, the house was shaping her fate. But not this time. Elisa wouldn't let her win. She needed to find a way to break the cycle. Margaret was missing. Elisa searched every room, calling her name, but the house responded with only silence. Then something caught her eye, a small crack in the floorboards near the grandfather clock. Her fingers trembled as she pried them open, revealing something buried beneath the house. A wooden box. Inside, wrapped in decayed cloth, lay old papers, photographs, and a single rusted key. She picked up a photograph. A woman in black stood in the background. No face. Eleanor. Beneath it, a letter written in Abigail's hand. "She won't let me leave. But I found the key. The basement isn't the way out. The house has another door, hidden where no one dares to look." Elisa's breath hitched. Another door? Where? Then the whisper came again. "Look behind you." Elisa whirled around, but the hallway was empty. The shadows shifted, pulling toward the end of the hall, where the walls seemed wrong. She ran her hands along the surface until she felt it. A gap, a hidden door. The rusted key in her hand burned cold. She shoved it into the lock and turned. With a deep, groaning creak, the door opened, revealing a room that shouldn't exist. Inside, the walls were lined with portraits. Each face was blurred, unrecognizable, except one. Margaret. And beneath her portrait, Abigail. Elisa's stomach churned as she stepped inside. There was something else in the center of the room, a chair. Straps dangled from the arms, as if someone had been tied down. The air was thick with the scent of rotting wood and something worse. And then a slow tap, tap, tap. From the ceiling, Elisa looked up and screamed. Margaret hung from the rafters, her lifeless body swaying gently. But her eyes were still open. Her mouth moved, forming silent words. Elisa's breath came in sharp gasps. "She's still here." Then, movement. From the shadows behind Margaret, something uncoiled. Long, twisted fingers emerged from the darkness. A shape, tall, wrong, shifting. And then, Eleanor stepped into the light. Her void-like face twisted as if she were trying to smile. "You found my room," she whispered. The door behind Elisa slammed shut. Elisa lunged for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Eleanor moved closer, the air around her thick with decay. "You don't belong here," Elisa choked out. Eleanor tilted her head. "I belong everywhere." The portraits on the walls began to change. The blurred faces became clear. Each one was a past victim. Each one had lived in this house. Each one had tried to escape. And now, they were part of the house forever. Elisa would be next. Unless she finished the story her way, Elisa knew there was only one way out. If Eleanor was bound to the house, then the house had to die. She grabbed the lantern from the wall. Her fingers shaking, Eleanor screamed, the air cracking around her as Elisa hurled the lantern to the ground. Flames erupted. The fire spread fast, licking up the walls, consuming the portraits, devouring the past. Eleanor's shriek turned into a howl of rage. The shadows twisted, pulled inward, as if the house itself was trying to swallow her whole. Elisa ran, stumbling through the smoke, through the heat, through the memories. She burst through the front door just as the Holloway house collapsed behind her. The fire roared into the night, and then silence. The house was gone. But was Eleanor? Days later, Elisa stood in the empty lot where the house had once been. There was nothing left but ashes and rubble. She pulled out Abigail's journal, the last page still blank. Elisa took a deep breath, then wrote, "The house is gone. The story is over. No one else will be lost." As she closed the book, a cold breeze brushed past her. A whisper echoed through the air. "Is it?" Elisa froze, and in the reflection of a nearby window, a tall figure in black stood behind her. The Holloway house was gone. Elisa stood at the edge of the burnt remains, inhaling the scent of charred wood and lost memories. The house had been erased. And yet, something still lingered. A presence. A whisper. Eleanor wasn't truly gone. She had survived something before, and she would survive again. Elisa gripped the journal, flipping through the last pages. Her words were still there, but something new had been added. "You can burn a house, but you cannot burn a story." Elisa's breath caught. She hadn't written that. She tried to ignore it. She left the town, moved into an apartment miles away, and tried to forget. For weeks, she didn't hear the whispers. Until one night. The TV flickered. The lights dimmed. And then, a shadow in the corner of her room. Not just a shadow. A figure. Tall, dressed in black. No face. The room became colder, and in the silence, Eleanor spoke. "You thought it was over?" Elisa gasped, stumbling back. "No, I ended it." Eleanor's head tilted, her empty void of a face twisting. "You wrote the last page." The air shivered as the journal's pages flipped open on their own, and there, written, in fresh ink, the story must continue. Eleanor wasn't bound to the house anymore. She was bound to the story, and Elisa had written it. The next morning, Elisa packed her bags. She was running again. But as she locked her apartment door, her neighbor called out, "Hey, that's a cool old book you got there." Elisa's blood ran cold. Her neighbor, he was holding the journal. She hadn't given it to him. She hadn't even taken it out of her apartment. Her hands trembled. Where did you get that?" He shrugged. "Someone left it outside my door. Last night, Elisa's stomach twisted. It wasn't just a haunted house anymore. The story had found a new home. Elisa tried to destroy the journal. She burned it, tore the pages, drowned it in the bathtub. But every time she turned around, it was back on her desk. No matter where she went, it followed. And then the stories began to change. New names, new places. She wasn't just trapped in the story anymore. The story was rewriting itself. And every time someone read the words, Eleanor grew stronger. There was only one way to stop it. Elisa had to break the cycle. Not just for herself, but for everyone. She flipped to the last page and grabbed a pen. Her hand shook as she wrote the final words. Eleanor's story ends here. She fades into nothing. She will never return. She closed the book. For the first time in weeks, the room was silent. Had it worked? Elisa exhaled, exhaustion weighing her down. But then, a whisper. You think I need a book? Elisa's heart stopped. She turned slowly and saw Eleanor standing behind her. No longer bound to the pages, no longer just a story. She had become something more. Elisa screamed. The lights flickered. The walls stretched. Eleanor reached out. Darkness swallowed everything. Then, silence. A week later, a young writer named Daniel moved into Elisa's abandoned apartment. In the middle of the empty living room, he found an old book. The title read, The Holloway House, A True Story. Curious, he picked it up and flipped through the pages. He didn't notice the shadow in the corner of the room. He didn't feel the air grow colder, and as he began to read aloud, Eleanor smiled.